Okay, so I want to talk about 3 cues and 1 just sort of blanket cue that you can use whenever you're lifting, especially at challenging loads, or at volume where the final couple of reps becomes very challenging. In other words, whenever you start to discover technical breakdowns, these mental cues are going to help focus your thought, which of course is going to hopefully have an influence over how your body moves. But also another benefit of focusing your thought is it pushes out, it crowds out all other thought, all right? And one of the things here is just, one of the things about lifting, especially testing, is controlling the noise. We want you to be as focused as possible, your attention as focused as possible on the task at hand, and not drifting into negative space or into distracted space. So the first cue to use under stress is to drive your feet. Whenever you think about a lot of the major lifts that we do, deadlift, back squat, front squat, and cleans, the number one, the prime mover of those lifts are your legs, all right? And if you're driving your feet into the ground, most likely that bar is going to be moving up. It's going to be moving in the direction we want it to move. So driving your feet is the number one thing that you should be thinking. And it's also going to create a balance between the push-pull, for example, on the deadlift and the clean, where we want to be pushing our feet into the ground and then pulling with our posterior chain and with our upper body in order to extend our shoulders over our hips. So we're creating that positive push-pull relationship, and we're focusing on the prime mover of those major lifts actually doing the moving. This also applies with bench press and military press, but in a slightly different way. Rather than drive your feet, keep pressing. A lot of times with a heavy bench press or military press, you can throw just 5 pounds on total, so 2.5s on each side, and you touch your chest and you go to press, and the bar speed stops, or it comes to a near complete stop. Well, if you don't think to yourself to keep pressing, you may lose in that moment. Or you may think like, oh man, you may have that thought, that sort of deviant thought of like, oh man, it's going to come down. You know, I'm not going to get it. Well, we want to, as much as we can, we want to eradicate that from happening. So the idea of just like keep pressing is important. And it's important to say keep pressing rather than don't quit. All right, we want to say keep pressing because that is the action that we want to do rather than the action that we don't want to do, which is quit. The next one I want to talk about is shoulders over hips. Now this is going to apply to a person where whether or not you're cleaning or using a back squat, if you have that tendency in these movements where you have your shoulders, hips, knees here, if you have a tendency for your butt to rise and for your shoulders to fall, then we want you to use that mental cue of shoulders over hips. Whenever you come through the crux on a back squat or on a front squat or on a clean, whenever you come through that crux and that first pull, we want to get the shoulders over the hips. That's going to create a vertical spine, and it's going to create more drive for your legs so that we can drive our feet into the ground. The more angled forward we are, the more our back has to do the work to stabilize our spine. The more vertical we are, the more our legs can just drive motion, okay? So if you are a person that tends to drive the hips back and have the shoulders fall down, we want you to get your shoulders to think about and use the mental cue of shoulders over the hips. Now, our third one is hips under the bar. Hips under the bar is especially useful for those people who, whenever they squat and they get into the mid, or they start to come back up from the squat, they tend to have a little bit of knee dive here, all right? If you're having knee dive, then we want you to think hips under the bar, because if you're getting your hips forward, your entire posterior chain is going to turn on, and of course your butt is an external rotator, so it's going to drive your knees out, and it's going to pull you more to vertical. If your knees are in, it's going to be hard for you to get vertical, but as soon as your knees go out because your hips come under the bar, now your legs can do that work. In a lot of ways, shoulders over hips and hips under the bar, they're two separate ways to accomplish the same thing, but we're going to apply it in different situations depending on what your fault may be whenever you get heavy in a lift. So for my athletes that have butt rise and shoulder dive, shoulders over hips. For my athletes who have knee dive, hips under the bar. And this is all you need to think as you're coming back up. You need to immediately think hips under the bar, hips under the bar. So that as you pass through that crux, the first thing that happens is your hips start to drive forward. Consequently, your shoulders will also go back. And then the final one, this is a catch-all, and if you have faultless lifting, none of these will apply to you, but you still need to have the idea in your mind of keep going, all right? Just keep driving through the lift. Don't quit. Keep going. And so again, we want to frame this as a positive. We want to frame this as an action that we want to accomplish rather than framing it as a negative. So the idea here is no matter what, if you can't remember your mental cue, whatever, in that moment, just keep going, keep going. Keep driving that barbell up. Keep attempting to pull your chin above the bar. Keep driving your feet into the ground. Whatever it is, just keep going.